A fundamental mechanism prompting this cascade of important metabolic information for healthy living is changing epigenetics, changing gene expression.
Those that had higher amounts of omega-6 are the ones who became obese.
I would say the majority of my patients who are regularly consuming fish, they've got mercury. It's distressing to me. Fish are essential for us, essential.
Right.
And yet it's harder and harder to do it in a safe way.
But FDA is behind the times when it comes to a lot of scientific information. To this day, FDA does not distinguish between omega-6 and omega-3 on the label. FDA puts down PUFAs. Now you tell me how irresponsible this is.
Hi, listeners. It's hard to believe, but New Frontiers in Functional Medicine has been going strong since 2015. With over 200 episodes and over 2 million listens, we are growing every year. My goal is to continue to bring you the best minds in functional medicine, epigenetics, and longevity. I want the content to be actionable for the functional medicine clinician and interesting for the rest of us. Thank you for supporting this podcast with your likes, with your honest reviews, with sharing the episodes with your friends and family. And if you haven't done so, please consider leaving a like or leaving us an honest review wherever you've accessed this podcast. Thank you, thank you, thank you to our sponsors. Because of our sponsors, these are companies that I trust, that we vet carefully, that we use in clinical practice, that I use personally. Because of them, everything associated with this podcast is free. If you haven't done so, I suggest you head over to DrKF to the podcast page where you can access the full transcript for every single one of these 200 episodes. And along with that transcript, you'll get an episode summary. You can get the research citations and additional content that is pertinent to the episode. I myself return to the transcript page all the time to pull out a little snippet of information that I want to recall or access a citation. Or better yet, sign up for our newsletter, again, at drkfitzgerald.com, and every single podcast episode will drop in your email as soon as it's released. Thanks again. Thank you to our Diamond Level sponsors, Biotics Research, Rupa Health, and Integrative Therapeutics. For over 40 years, the foundation of Biotics Research has been innovation and quality. Their goals remain unchanged: innovative ideas, carefully researched concepts, and product development with advanced analytical and manufacturing techniques. Biotics nutritional products are of superior quality and effectiveness. They're available exclusively to healthcare providers. Find them at bioticsresearch.com. I also want to give a shout out to our friends over at Rupa Health. They make lab testing easy, fabulous, doable for you, the clinician, and for you, the patient. Consider using Rupa as your super, super, super smart solution to all things laboratory testing. Visit them at rupahealth.com. For over 35 years, patients and clinicians have trusted Integrative Therapeutics for their dedication to quality, potency, and accuracy, and for bringing us exclusive products backed by science. From sourcing of premium raw materials to their meticulous manufacturing processes, they prioritize consistency, efficacy, and safety because our patients deserve nothing less. Find them at integrativepro.com. That's integrativepro.com. Thanks to our gold sponsors, Timeline and OneSkin. Timeline, fueling cellular energy for a lifetime of healthy aging. Find them at timelinenutrition.com. And OneSkin, skin age reversal technology. Find them at oneskin.co. Hi, everybody. Welcome to New Frontiers in Functional Medicine, where we are interviewing the best minds in functional medicine. And today, of course, is no exception. I am, if you're with me here on YouTube, you can see I'm sitting next to, really one of the people who has influenced the course of my thinking and my career, whose work I have cited and virtually every lecture I've ever given, where the topic of omega-3s has come up. She's just an incredible human being and has a wealth of knowledge to share with us today. So let me introduce you to her, and we're going to tuck right into what I think is going to be one of the best conversations I've had here on New Frontiers. This is Dr. Artemis Simopoulos, and she is a pioneer in the field of nutrition and genetics. She's the founder and president of the Center for Genetics, Nutrition, and Health, a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. She has been involved in cutting-edge research since 1990. She was in the institutes, the NIH, for many, many years, where she's looked carefully at nutrition with a focus on omega-3s and omega-6s, and actually the evolution of dietary patterns and dietary pattern changes. She's known globally for this body of research. She's published hundreds of pieces in peer-reviewed literature. She's contributed to or written over 60 books. She currently, and what we'll be touching on today, is her newest book, The Healthiest Diet for You, Scientific Aspects. There'll be a link in the show notes. And what else can I say? She's just, it's a blessing, and I feel really grateful to be able to talk to you today, Dr. Simopoulos. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the very nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be here with you.
Yeah. So many of us in the field of functional medicine are well aware of your work. You've just shaped our thinking. You are an endocrinologist, so I want to go way back for a minute before we tuck into all of the knowledge that you've unearthed for us. You're an endocrinologist by training. I mean, how did you end up studying omega-6s and omega-3s and looking at evolutionary dietary patterns? I mean, what is your background and what is this journey?
Well, to begin with, I majored in chemistry at Barnard College at Columbia University. And then I went to Boston University School of Medicine. And at that time, I was interested in pediatrics, and particularly in the early development of children. So I was director of the neonatology unit at George Washington University Hospital. And while I was there, I began to be aware of the metabolic changes in premature as well as full-term babies. And that was a very new way of thinking. So I made some observations, and then the director of NIH invited me to join NIH. I really did not have to look for a job. Wow. And at that time, most of the young doctors at the NIH, there were people, mostly young men who joined the public health service and did not go to the war. And so I think I was the only young woman at the time at the NIH. And so I moved from pediatrics and metabolism into the metabolic and endocrine disorders. And many of the endocrine disorders have a genetic component. So I ended up combining genetics, endocrinology, and genetic variation. And the moment you get into that field, you need to understand the evolutionary aspects of diet and the changes that have taken place and how that influences growth and development throughout the life cycle. So it's not really that unusual.
Right. It's just as you were teasing apart understanding the influence of genetics on health outcome, you would be looking at, in my postdoc position, I was under the direction of a nutritional biochemist. So we were looking at enzymes and the cofactors and so forth, and how, certain dietary patterns would favorably or negatively influence them. Right. Was it something like that?
Right. So at that time, I was doing research in children who had a metabolic disease that was called actually Bartter syndrome, which was the name of the chief of endocrinology at that time, and he had described it. And part of the research involved the metabolism of prostaglandins. And it was at the time when In Sweden, they got the Nobel Prize for prostaglandin metabolism. So I began to look into the nutritional aspects of prostaglandins. And that's how I moved into the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. They're actually all connected. I just happened to be at the right time, at the right place.
Amazing. Yeah. So I was introduced to Dr. Simopoulos through Dr. Charles Sirhan, who uncovered specialized pro-resolving lipid mediators, another derivative compound from omega fatty acids. And so you were looking at prostaglandins, of course,
Yes.
just also, a family of incredibly important compounds. Interesting.
Yes.
Very interesting. So then that would bring you to dietary patterns. No doubt, looking at this prostaglandin imbalance in this population, the change in the dietary pattern was probably influencing, or the dietary pattern, the amount of omega-6s and 3s, I'm imagining, was influencing the course of this genetic condition. Is that right?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. And so in order to be able to understand human metabolism, you need to have very good knowledge of the composition of the diet.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know the changes that have taken place. You need to know if there are any specific genetic variants or if there is a family history. So you can bring all these factors together and move forward. And that's exactly what we did when I was chair of the Nutrition Coordinating Committee at the National Institutes of Health. We pulled together all the nutrition programs, not only of the NIH, but of the whole Department of Health and Human Services.
Wow.
What was going on, at CDC, for the Centers for Disease Control, what they were doing in nutrition, what the FDA was doing, as well as what all the institutes at the NIH were doing, in order to be able to see where the country is. Until that time, there had never been any coordination. So that was another factor that moved me forward.
And now we really have a pretty extraordinary body of research. In fact, when I was, looking into your work, we have this incredible body of NHANES data where we've been tracking how, Americans eat over many years. And it's from that data, which no doubt, you've got your fingerprints on, that we know, 90% of Americans aren't consuming enough of omega-3 fatty acids. And I want to go back before you comment on that. And actually, I'll just throw another stat out because it's fresh in my mind. Heart failure patients, I think 98% have been shown, looking at NHANES data, to be deficient in omega-3 fatty acids. So you are the one who figured out that we evolved with a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s in our diet. We evolved with this radically different ratio of these incredibly important omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids that produce all these important derivative compounds like the prostaglandins, the leukotrienes, the pro-resolving lipid mediators. Like, you figure that out. Flash forward now to what two other points I want to make from your work is that you also realized that many of us are consuming now a 20-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 dietary pattern, a 20-to-1. And then in your work, you further teased out that this ratio imbalance is associated with heart disease, with cancer, with allergic disease, asthma, and on and on and on. So, when I talk about your work in my lectures, I am always attempting to just hit home this point that we are in modern society today in the midst of this unwitting massive deficiency that our body really doesn't even know how to manage well, because we evolved with very different metabolic information. So talk to me about all of that.
Well, let me tell you how it came about. I'm sure you are, and as well as your audience, familiar with the 7-country study and cardiovascular disease that started 50 years ago. And at that time, they put particular attention on the Mediterranean diet and the diet of Crete and olive oil and saturated fat. And they didn't pay any attention to the essential fatty acids, specifically omega-6 and omega-3. In terms of the fat studies, it was saturated fat and olive oil. Well, when I went back and looked at the data, I was determined to find out exactly what was going on, because I noticed the 7-country study at that time, it included Greece, Japan, Poland, Italy, the then Yugoslavia, Finland. And the people in Crete had the lowest rate of heart disease, and they lived the longest. But after the Cretans, you would expect either the Yugoslavians, who are on that included Croatia on the Adriatic, and Italy to be the second one, if the factors were the way they visualized them, olive oil and saturated fat and fresh fruits and vegetables. But the people that followed the Cretan data were the Japanese. So I then looked to, and they were, of course, thousands of miles apart. I then decided to figure out what was a common factor between the Japanese and the people of Crete in their diet, or other factors that could account for these similarities in terms of having low cardiovascular disease and long survival. And in order to do that, I had to go back and look at all the data they had collected. And I noticed that they had ignored a lot of factors that were very important. When they translated the food frequency questionnaires, they put down fresh fish rather than fish. And fresh fish in Crete, they only have it along the seashore. The rest of the island did not have refrigeration at that time. So they really did not pay any attention to the fish in the 7-country study. So when I went back and in detail, I examined their data, and then I collected my own data, and I decided to figure out in detail what they were eating. I found out that the people in Crete ate a lot of fish, because they ate a lot of, actually every day they would have sardines. On Fridays, they would have herring, which are high doses of omega-3 fatty acids. They ate a lot of green leafy vegetables on a daily basis, and particularly wild plants. So when I looked at the composition, I found out that the wild green leafy vegetables are full of omega-3 fatty acids. So all of a sudden then, I found things that they had not even considered in the 7-country study. And then I went and looked over the Japanese data, and you know, the Japanese eat fish every day. So the common factor was not the saturated fat or the olive oil. The common factor were the essential fatty acids, and the fact that they had plenty of omega-3s, much higher amounts than other populations, and they had a ratio, it was fascinating, of omega-6 to omega-3 that was 1.
That's amazing.
Then I moved on to look at the composition then of the egg under where the chickens, they fetch their own food. And their egg had a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, almost 1, whereas the USDA egg had a ratio of 20 to 1. So there was another evidence. So all of a sudden then, I saw these enormous differences that had been totally ignored. And you know, when it's something new, it's not easy for people to accept it right away. But I had very good data. I knew the data. We had brought hard-boiled eggs from Greece, from our own farm, to NIH, and Norm Salem and I measured them at the NIH. So no one could tell me that these were not true data. So we felt very comfortable in pointing out that throughout evolution, human beings evolved on a diet that was balanced in omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. And in fact, they had more omega-3s than omega-6 if you go all the way back. What happened in the US food supply is that right after the Second World War, they began to use vegetable oils such as safflower, sunflower, corn oil, cottonseed, that were not used before in such high amounts because they had to provide calories to the people at the end of the Second World War. So without knowing what are the effects of the omega-6 fatty acids, they went ahead, they bleached the oils, they made them taste better, they looked good, and they flooded the food supply, both in the US and Europe, with all these oils. So not only we had a deficiency of omega-3s, but we had an excessive amount of omega-6. And that's why then you ended up, just think, the poor cells being faced with this abnormal ratio, and they had to respond to the metabolic changes. So this is it. I mean, this is very factual. And when you look at the fact that they had totally ignored the essential fatty acids, to me, it's very hard to explain scientifically. It's just a matter of omitting and not doing accurate research.
I'm so grateful to be able to share this. This is extraordinarily pivotal. It's so important. I mean, so I think what you're saying is that, I mean, your work was brought to the fore. Eventually, it took a while for us to have an appreciation of eating fish. I mean, this is something everyone takes for granted. It's so fundamental, but it started with your work, your second investigation on that original 7-country study. Deciding to go in there and tease it apart. And then you have that background in genetics. So you're thinking about nutrition and nutritional influence. You're aware from your early work looking at that prostaglandin genetic condition so you had the lens to be able to figure this out. Bravo.
Look how everything came together, though.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's interesting. And I'll put in the show notes, people. In fact, I'll put in the show notes every paper that we reference, and of course, Dr. Simopoulos's books as well. And again, she's got a beautiful discussion on the Cretan diet and all of this. We'll put into the show notes, and I also linked to Charlie Serhan's podcast, where he has a similar story of serendipity in his discovery of the all incredible, resolvins coming from omega-6s and omega-3s as well. And it's, I want to talk about now. So then you took this information and you began to look at this extraordinary imbalance and tie it to different disease states. And I want to talk about that journey as well so not just heart disease, but really everything. And in fact, probably we can pin this. I mean, there's all sorts of imbalances happening, and we'll talk about ultra-processed foods more broadly, but you could pin this fundamental change in omega-6-3 ratio to really the chronic diseases, that exist today that we're grappling with.
Yes, because the omega-6 and the omega-3 essential fatty acids are two families that have opposing properties, physiologically and biochemically and clinically. And so it became very obvious that when you have such high amounts of omega-6 fatty acids and you produce a lot of pro-inflammatory metabolites, eicosanoids they're called, because there are 20 carbon atoms. These are prothrombotic. They increase the tendency to thrombus formation. They are pro-inflammatory. And we know from clinical studies and animal experiments that inflammation is at the base of all chronic diseases, whether it is cardiovascular disease, whether it is cancer, if it is arthritis. Obesity is an inflammatory disease. Obese people have pro-inflammatory cytokines, people with diabetes. So that it began to show right away that these essential fatty acids, and they are essential because the body cannot make it, we have to get them from our diets, are a very important aspect for normal growth and development. And by that, we mean in terms of brain function and metabolism, not only the chronic diseases, but also
Yes.
neurodegenerative diseases. And Charlie's work then is based on the differences we found between the omega-6 and omega-3, because his resolvins, they come from omega-3s. And they're anti-inflammatory and pro-resolving.
Yeah.
So it's really a continuation. To me, it's very exciting.
It's extraordinary, and hopefully both of you will be honored, you know, in the body of research, the fact that you both have contributed to changing the trajectory of health outcome, you know, in the world, you know, not just in the US, but in the world with your discoveries.
And it is amazing, you know, that Dr. Serhan, or Charlie, spent 6 years at the Karolinska Institute. And so he worked with the very best people, which were the people that originally described prostaglandin metabolism.
That's right. That's right. It's just 6 degrees of separation. You know, the other piece that's extraordinary about his discovery was that if the animal model he was using were not fed a high omega-3, he would have never seen the resolvins. He wouldn't have been able to see them. Certainly, he wouldn't have been able to pick them up in humans. I mean, we weren't making them with our, you know, incredibly skewed diet. He was looking at this model where they happened to be fed an abundance of omega-3s, and hence he discovered.
He knew of my work, and if you look at some of his early papers, he refers to our work and he refers to the ratio, and he supported the ratio right away and its importance.
It's absolutely important. So we evolved. So with this 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s, our cellular machinery was just evolved, being bathed in a very different ratio of prostaglandins, of leukotrienes, and of resolvins. And there's many, many, many of them. I just want to point out to the listeners, in fact, if I can find a decent pathway chart, I'll put that on the show notes as well, so you can at a glance look at these derivative compounds that we're talking about here coming from omega-3s and 6s. I mean, this is why we're changing it. So we evolved with a much different body of information there, and you have been able to, you know, just tease out pretty exquisitely different disease associations and then publish on it. Like, how did you do that? Like looking at the relationship with rheumatoid arthritis, with different autoimmune conditions, cancer, and so forth. Speak about that work.
Well, I was lucky that I was at the NIH, which is really the biggest and the best research center in the world. And people there collaborate. So if I really wanted to go and look at someone who was following persons with cardiovascular disease or arthritis and the type of studies they were doing, I would ask them to measure this or measure that. So I was not working in a vacuum. I was working in the best place I could possibly be working to do this work, because these were new ideas and you had to overcome, you know, the run-of-the-mill sort of type of knowledge that they were spitting around.
Just very, very exciting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I was going to say that if you want to show the pathways between omega-6 and omega-3, I can send you some simpler ones, or you can use some from the papers. But there is no question that they are physiologically and metabolically distinct, and they have opposing properties, which is very important. So you can imagine when you have, if you have this type of situation, and you have 20 times as much of one on the other, it can be overwhelming. And when those that are much higher are pro-inflammatory, and then you find out all the chronic diseases have inflammation as a basis, it's not that difficult to
begin to piece it together.
Yeah.
Well,
it's just that, you know, people for such a long time, they have focused on high carbohydrate, low carbohydrate, high fat, low fat, saturated fat. And they never really thought in terms of cellular metabolism, inflammation, and cytokine storms.
Yeah.
And now that they are doing that, I have no problem with anyone because people accept the importance of the ratio.
Yes, yes, it's come a long way. I mean, it's firmly established.
Yes.
We still have far to go, but we understand. People know now. At least if they don't know why, they know fish is good.
Yes.
I
And
want
green vegetables.
and green veggies. Yes, I know. So I want to ask you, I want to put a pin in that because I want to ask you about the Crete diet. I actually want to ask you about your diet as well, but I wanted to just point out to our listeners, and you might have some comments on this, is that the inflammation that can ensue from the omega-6 derived eicosanoids, so this is the prostaglandins and the leukotrienes. The leukotrienes are more towards allergic type presentations. And then the prostaglandins can feed all of the other forms. They're exquisitely potent. The interesting thing about this pathway is that it's really fundamental to what you're saying, any type of inflammation. So any phenotypic presentation of inflammation, be it pain, be it skin, be it brain, be it autoimmune, be it allergic, sources to these original prostaglandins.
Yes. So it becomes very important then to understand the evolutionary aspects of diet and genetic variation, because there are populations have genetic variants in the metabolism of the essential fatty acids as you go, for example, from the parent fatty acid down to the 20 carbon atoms. There are enzymes, and some people are very rapid metabolizers. So we can have two groups of people with the same amount of omega-6 and omega-3, and those that are rapid metabolizers, they will produce a lot more prostaglandins and leukotrienes, and therefore more inflammation, and therefore they increase the risk for chronic diseases. So even at the best, when you start with a balanced ratio, you would still, within the population, are going to be individuals that will produce extra prostaglandins and leukotrienes and less of Charlie's resolvins. And therefore, will be very important to know how to balance the metabolism of these people. And so it's more and more and more,
Well, speak to that. What are some of the variants in those enzymes, and who might be vulnerable to this?
Right. So what they're called is the enzymes are called desaturases.
Yeah.
And they actually is desaturase 1 and desaturase 2. They're given numbers. The people that are rapid metabolizers and they have high amounts of enzymes in this country as mostly African Americans. About 80% of the population in the US are of African Americans in the US have very high intake of the omega-6 fatty acids because they eat a lot of fried food, but at the same time, they have the enzyme that they produce more of the prostaglandins and the leukotrienes and less of the resolvins. So they're much more prone. And I'll tell you how this came about. Whenever you have a genetic variant, you have it because at one time it was very beneficial. And the environment changes, and through evolution, things change. So what happened is, in Africa, the population lived along the seashore, lakes, and rivers. And they were taking their omega-3 fatty acids directly from the fish, but also the animals that they hunted, they were grazing, and grass has omega-3s. So they moved from this environment into the central part of Africa. And therefore, they were no longer had omega-3 fatty acids from fish or a lot of the green leafy vegetables. And they developed then the need to be able to try to make larger amounts. And by doing that, they ended up producing more of the omega-6 and more of the omega-3, and trying through this genetic variant to formulate some kind of a balance so they wouldn't just have only a lot of omega-6. What happened is today, this genetic variant that was very helpful for their metabolism and their brain in the Sahara, today, with a high amount of omega-3s, it increases their pro-inflammatory state, so that it increases the risk for heart disease and cancer.
Healthcare providers have long relied on Dutch to uncover the underlying causes of hormone-related issues, offering actionable results supported by peer-reviewed research. In research highlighted in the November 2023 edition of the journal Menopause, dried urine testing was validated as an effective method for monitoring hormone replacement therapy. This pivotal study is just one example of the rigorous research that forms the foundation of Dutch's approach, empowering providers to make informed decisions with certainty. This study underscores Dutch's commitment to evidence-based medicine, equipping providers with the confidence to navigate complex treatment decisions. Explore the world of Dutch testing and our steadfast dedication to scientific integrity at dutchtest.com/research.
Dr. Fitzgerald deeply researched how to age well, and a clinically studied formula that can do wonders for your aging process is Qualia Senolytic. Senescent cells, or zombie cells, accumulate in your body past age 30, wasting your energy and nutrition and contributing to accelerated aging. Qualia Senolytic combines 9 vegan, plant-derived compounds to help naturally eliminate senescent cells to help you feel years younger. Try Qualia Senolytic at qualialife.com/Cara15 with code Cara15 for 15% off. That's Qualia Senolytic at www.qualialife.com/Cara15.
So you have then a population. In Europe, 50% are rapid metabolizers, 50% are average, normal. Among the people in the indigenous population, the American Indians, for example, they have exactly the opposite. They don't really make any, they don't have enough enzyme to proceed with the metabolism to form prostaglandins, leukotrienes, resolvins, and so forth. So you really need to give them either fish oils or fish and make sure. And then the same is true with the Arctic population. And then in Asia, again, it's about 25 to 50% that are rapid metabolizers. So you have two considerations. So one is the change in the food supply, which here came mostly because the food industry likes to make ultra-processed food, and it's very cheap. And so this way, they can have a situation where you have to do something about it. You can, because you have the genetic variant. At this time, we're in no position to go around and changing the genetics. I think probably in the future, we'll probably do that. So what you have to do is change the composition of the food supply, lower the omega-6 and raise the omega-3s, and trying to bring a balanced ratio.
Yeah. I recall that South Asians who tend to be, there's a larger vegetarian vegan population where I think the fast metabolizers, they had desaturase that were able to take the shorter chain omega-3s and move them down to EPA and DHA.
Yes.
Which was great when they're eating, probably a really dense green vegetable, high omega-3 diet, but then
Yes.
come here to the US where everything is omega-6, and then you're rapidly metabolizing to all the pro-inflammatory prostaglandins.
Right. So what helps them in
Yeah.
India, for example, or Southeast Asia, they come
Mhm.
here and they have these enzymes now produce tremendous amounts of the omega-6. So
Yeah.
that's why I think eventually we should be able to develop a type of society where the people understand family history, they understand genetic variation, they understand the risk, they understand that what we become is a result of interaction between our genes and
Mhm.
our environment. And nutrition is the most important environmental factor.
Yeah.
We really need to think of a diet that is nutritionally balanced and at the same time, in terms of the environment, does not injure the environment. The diet
Yes.
has two very important, I would say, columns. One is the nutritional composition, and the other is how that affects the environment, because
Mhm.
you don't want to have problems with the environment. But I think there are enough young people now that are moving in that direction.
Becoming definitely more savvy and concerned
Yes.
and aware, and yeah, just caring about that. Yeah. So in clinic, we measure omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids all the time, and we look at the ratios and so
Yes.
forth. We don't yet have access to looking at the pro-resolving lipid mediators, or, we can't look at the leukotrienes and prostaglandins as readily to see what people are making.
Right.
Which hopefully will become available to us. To your point, we can see, who's biased towards producing these pro-inflammatory compounds. You can get some information by making sure they've got enough, EPA and DHA, and making sure
Yes.
that their arachidonic acid is low. So you have some information, but not quite as much as we could. Because we know in certain, when it's biased towards the omega-3, the omega-6 picture that you're describing, this
Yes.
prostaglandin dump, they're not making the resolvins. And that's the case in a lot of the chronic diseases that we see, ubiquitously in the world, not just in the US. And so,
All over the world.
yeah, just for me as a doctor treating patients aware of this, I really hope for the day that these laboratory investigations are available so that I can be assured that my patient is, creating the appropriate ratios.
But I'm glad you're measuring it. And we have recommended repeatedly that they need to, because, dietary histories are not adequate, but you
Yeah.
can measure them directly in the blood. You can measure red cell membrane phospholipids and know exactly. And there are studies
Yeah.
that show very clearly, the Women's Health study almost 10 years ago, they showed that when they measured the red cell membrane phospholipids for omega-6 and omega-3, and they followed them for 10 years, those that had higher amounts of omega-6 are the ones who became obese. So you
Amazing.
can actually
That's right.
more or less predict who is going to be obese by knowing what they're eating relative to essential fatty acids. And there's no question that the pro-inflammatory state leads to an omega-6 fatty acids themselves, to the enlargement of the fat cell, as well as enlarging the number, where the omega-3 fatty acids stimulate brown adipose tissue and you lose weight.
Incredible.
Omega-3s, you lose weight. With the omega-6, you gain weight.
Let me just say, because some people are probably listening, a lot of folks are, they're clinicians and in functional medicine. So they've got, they know these pathways. But some people are going to be thinking, why did we even evolve with omega-6? Like, why do we even need this pro-inflammatory, pro-aging, incredibly damaging, obesogenic, fatty acids? So talk about that.
Well, the thing is, we don't really need it. It's just that the food industry is creating foods that are high in omega-6 fatty acids. And so today, if you go to the supermarket and you see what people are buying, I'll tell you, I'm surprised. The majority of people are buying food that comes in boxes or it's frozen. And it was much less number of people that buy fresh fruits, vegetables, fish, or they even buy flour to make bread or their own pies. And all these ultra-processed foods are very high in omega-6 fatty acids, and they have a higher ratio. And we have very good evidence for that. And then Dr. Hall at the NIH did this excellent study under complete controlled metabolic conditions, where he was able to measure everything that the subjects, the people ate, as well as their energy expenditure. And so what it was 20 people. And for the first 2 weeks, half of them, they went ahead and had select their own foods. And those were selected from the ultra-processed food. 2 weeks later, the same people were selecting from little processed or unprocessed foods. When they looked at their biochemical findings, those who selected the ultra-processed food, they had eaten faster, they ate 500 more calories, they had gained 2 pounds.
In 2 weeks.
Where the other people, they had lost 2 pounds and they had not eaten extra calories. So what is very important, I went back and looked at the data and calculated the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. And so the ultra-processed had the ratio of 11.1 to 1, where those who were the little processed, unprocessed, they were 5 to 1. It becomes very difficult in the US unless you make a very special effort to try to bring the ratio below 4 to 1. You know, there are studies done with women who have migraine headache. And migraine is very much dependent on omega-3 fatty acids to be able to control it. And so they tried not to use supplement, but to see if they could through the diet. And after a lot of trials, eventually they were able to bring it down to about 3 to 1. It became very difficult because you already have a population that is used to eating certain foods.
Yeah. That's right. It would be hard. Well, and we're not getting those beautiful wild greens from, you know, the Isle of Crete. Like, even if we get very high quality organic greens, they're not likely to be as dense in omega-1, or I mean omega-3s.
But I think what you can do is for cooking oils, you can change the cooking oils. So you can use either any of the monounsaturated oils. You know, of course, in the Mediterranean region, they use olive oil. But then in Turkey, where they don't have olive trees, for example, they're along the Black Sea, and Bulgaria and Georgia, in these countries, they have a lot of hazelnuts. So they make oil out of the hazelnuts, which is highly monounsaturated. And then in Hawaii, they make it from macadamia nuts. In other parts of South and Central America, they make it from avocado. So you can use a high monounsaturated oil, and then you can combine it with a little bit of canola oil to add omega-3s to it. Now, what I find fascinating is that when you look around the world through the ages, practically every continent produced omega-3 oils. For example, in Northern Europe, it was always the production of rapeseed oil, and they still grow rapeseed, and the rapeseed oil has a ratio of 2 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3, which is a very good ratio. In Canada, in the indigenous populations, they had flaxseed. Flaxseed oil is omega-3s, again, a ratio of 2 to 1. And then you go down to South America, they have chia. Chia has omega-3s. In Japan, they have perilla oil in northern China. And then in the Middle East, they eat a lot of legumes. Legumes contain omega-3s. So that's why in my latest book, The Healthiest Diet for You, Scientific Aspects, I explain all this. The last chapter, it tells you exactly how to have a diet that will be balanced in omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. I think it's one of the most important aspects of good health.
One of the most
The balance
powerful.
ratio. It's very
Yeah.
powerful.
Yes. Now, some people in this country, and I'm going to guess that people are thinking about that, listening to our conversation, believe that canola is, or the way that canola is actually made today in this country, probably the non-organic, more industrial produced canola is not healthy. And people stay away from it altogether, but you think there's a place for using it.
Well, let me tell you, I have heard those statements, but I have not seen any proof. Have you?
You know what? I cannot pull. I don't know that I have. I have to say there's no paper. There's no paper in my mind.
The reason they make that statement is because, so you have organic canola, which is fine. And then you have the canola that actually is genetically modified. And they say that because there are a lot of people who believe that if you have genetic modification, you have a problem. The trouble is that when they switch from canola to canola following genetic modification, they should have labeled the differences and they should have followed it.
Yeah.
But FDA at that time elected not to examine that. Although I am not worried about genetic modification of canola oil, at the same time, I know that neither I or anybody else has the data to say it is 100% safe or it is 100% bad. So if you have any doubts, don't use canola. Use organic canola if you want to.
Yeah.
There are other ways to overcome that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so I want to go back to that Kevin Hall paper where you looked at the omega-3, omega-6s, and that will be on the show notes, folks. 11 to 1. So in this ultra processed group, they were consuming 11 to 1, 6 to 3. And that is the recommended amount to be consuming from the FDA. I mean, last I checked, 11 to 1 was actually considered okay by
well, FDA is behind the times when it comes to a lot of scientific information. To this day, FDA does not distinguish between omega-6 and omega-3 on the label. FDA puts down PUFAs. Now you tell me how irresponsible this is.
Yeah,
how can you possibly have the best research in one of the best countries in the world and have a regulatory agency that does not keep up with the research?
Yeah, the research that's being done, within the, National Institutes of Health.
I'll give you another example because I describe that in the book. Dr. Van Vliet at Duke, he went ahead and did metabolomic studies, looking specifically at the individual cell components and part of the cell in people who ate a hamburger that came from an animal that was grass-fed, and then took another group of people and fed them those imitation hamburgers, or fake foods, if you want to call them, and then measured through metabolomics the various peptides in the blood of the individuals. And he found enormous differences between the two In fact, he found something like 127 different peptides in the fake hamburger, in the person who ate the fake hamburger, than in the person who ate the grass-fed. Now, a lot of these, we don't even know what they are. We don't even know what they do.
Yeah.
But they are not there when you eat a diet that is consistent with evolution versus an ultra-processed or imitation food. Now, why would anybody want to eat one of those fake hamburgers?
I mean, are you, we do, there's a huge vegan movement. And I guess, you know what, to your earlier point, how do we raise cattle, you know, really respecting the environment? Is that doable, do you think? Have you thought about that?
Yes, I have thought about that. And then that's two approaches to it. One is, I think they have to be grass-fed.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is that we should cut down on the amount of meat we eat. We ought to eat less meat, and we ought to eat even less fish, and then balance the two. And then eat more green leafy vegetables, fruits, legumes,
Yes.
and smaller fish.
Right.
Because you don't really worry, but legumes are a very good source of protein, and they're delicious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you cannot go around and eating your whole life hamburgers, hot dogs, and French fries.
Yeah. To your point about small fish, and then I want to talk a little bit about the Crete diet in your book, but I also I want to hear about you and your diet. Your farm that you referenced that you got these amazing eggs from. So I'm curious about all of that. But I want to mention the fact that, you know, in my patient population now, over the course of practicing medicine, when I first started, I saw mercury in my patients. So I look for toxins in my patients, and I did see mercury from time to time. Now, I would say the majority of my patients who are regularly consuming fish, they've got mercury. It's distressing to me, but I'm curious about your thoughts. So fish are essential for us, essential.
Right.
And yet it's harder and harder to do it in a safe way.
Yeah, well, the mercury in fish, I think it is a problem. And the question is how much mercury it is. And when they measure it, because they have done studies where they have measured the mercury in fish, and they have studies with pregnant women, because you don't really want to have high mercury levels in pregnant women. And they found out that there's the amount of mercury is the effect of the amount of mercury that is in the fish today in those clinical studies was not injurious to the baby, where it would be more injurious if the mother did not have any omega-3s.
Oh, interesting, interesting. Well, you know what? It wouldn't be the first time that I have heard that the additional nutrients present in fish can protect from the mercury. For instance, the selenium can
Correct.
bind mercury. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And don't
Right.
forget, for example, in Greece, people eat a lot of octopus. An octopus has 100 micrograms of selenium per 100 grams, which is
Wow.
really one serving, you know, one of those little feet has enough selenium that is enough for a day. So you need to have a very good picture of the composition of the diet. That's why I think when they talk about dietary patterns don't tell you how much of the important nutrients are or are not in the food you eat. You need to know the composition, and you need to find ways to improve the composition, because the current food supply is injurious to health, leads to chronic diseases, obesity, diabetes, cancer, arthritis. I mean, there's arthritis everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about So how do we do this? How do we actually do it? I think you outline it in your book, maybe a little bit about the Crete diet and, what you're eating. Like, how do you attempt to maintain such a broad micronutrient intake? And yeah.
Well, let me tell you, of course, I'm on a Greek diet. I was born in Greece. I was brought up in Greece. I buy omega-3 enriched eggs. So if I'm going to eat eggs, I make sure they're omega-3 enriched. I drink a lot of water. I don't drink any alcohol. I eat a lot of fruit. For example, in the morning, I have fruit, and then I have herbal tea, and then I would have, I make sort of a bread that has walnuts and raisins and honey, and it's made with whole wheat, and I eat that for breakfast. And then I always eat salads or soups, vegetables, with vegetables and either chickpeas or beans or lentils or mung beans. It's always a legume, a soup made with legumes and vegetables. And sometimes I may have a piece of fish or I may have a piece of meat. And I prefer lamb, to beef. And then I usually don't snack, but if I snack, it's either fruit or nuts. I like mixed nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Mixed nuts, walnuts are high in omega-3s, as you know.
Yeah.
And then almonds are very good. They're very high in protein. You can have that. And then for dinner, I usually have, sometimes I make a spinach pie, which has eggs, milk, cheese, spinach, and a lot of herbs. Or I make chicken pie that lasts for a week and I just eat it intermittently and so forth. So it is not difficult. And I try not to eat out. And when I eat out, I usually eat mostly, I would say, fish.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds pretty delicious.
I do have a cheeseburger. Sometimes I do. It's not that I don't, but I don't do it that often, probably less than once a month.
Well, I'm glad to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear.
I go to a place where they put arugula and tomato and lettuce in their cheeseburger.
That sounds very good. Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah. Are you supplementing with omega-3s out of curiosity?
Yes, I was coming to that. Now, in the diet of Crete, and this is a very important point, when I looked at everything they ate on a daily basis, I noticed that the omega-3 fatty acids were present in every meal, and that ratio was balanced. Now, eating fish twice a week, which is the recommendation, is not enough. Because what do you do the other 2-3 days when you don't have any fish? Mm-hmm. Particularly in the Western diets we're talking about. So I take supplements. I have been taking, all my friends and I have been taking supplements since the 1985 conference that we had at the NIH, that we're all convinced on the importance of omega-3s.
Wow.
This way is like the diet of Crete, because they have to be there all the time.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I agree.
I don't know how you can get away from supplements.
Yes, that's right. Especially again, in the Western diet, to your point.
Yeah.
And now, of course, we can supplement even with the resolvins. We have access in supplementary form to the SPMs. So that's cool as well. And I use those in practice frequently. Well, I want to say just two other things in closing. I know we're really at time here, but so my area, in addition to being a clinician, I've been conducting research looking at biological age, specifically looking at epigenetics and gene expression, or with the diet and lifestyle.
Yes.
And so we know that omega-3s are really important for longevity and people who've got a nice amount.
They decrease the rate of the aging process.
They do, as does the Mediterranean diet, these diets dense in these
Yes.
incredible phytonutrients that we've been talking about. And
Yes.
one of the very exciting things for me in my research is seeing that probably a fundamental mechanism prompting this, this cascade of important metabolic information for healthy living is changing epigenetics, changing gene expression. So I wanted to just bring that up because there are papers starting to come out, really pinning that to the Mediterranean diet. So I think,
Yes.
and omega-3. So really two pieces that you're very responsible to putting on the map for us. We're seeing as we really look carefully at gene expression and epigenetics, it's, in biological age
Yes.
and all of that.
But don't forget that nutrients influence gene expression.
Yes.
And then genetic variants influence metabolism of nutrients. That's why we established the Society of Nutrigenetics / Nutrigenomics.
It's essential. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very important. Yeah.
It's moving slowly, but it's certainly the science of the future.
Yes, we're at a neat inflection point, and it's certainly your many years effort in moving the needle on health in our country is bearing fruit. But to your point, it's slow, but it's there. Your work is indelibly imprinted on all of us. I know my mom, for example, is gonna just what I grew up with. I mean, she and she'll be very excited about this particular conversation, but all of us are really starting to understand it, not just those of us who are in the field.
I want to say one thing about the book. When I wrote the book, I wrote it during the time of COVID when everybody was locked in.
Wow.
And I became obvious to me that what is needed, not a cookbook and not a recipe book, is a book where you present the science accurately, but as easily as you can, to reach the people who are interested in learning more about health and nutrition, but also it will be something that the teachers are going to use in high school and teach the students to be curious about their food and what it means, and then to also get more of the science to dietitians and nutritionists.
Yes.
And in medical school, schools of public health, and doctors, because doctors have to know more.
We will, without question, feature your book on the website, and we will put it on, our various social media platforms. Yeah, it's incredibly important book, and I would like
exercise that I downloaded for free. Because really, I wanted people to definitely get to read the book.
We will,
that sort of thing.
That's beautiful, and we will get it out into the world for you as much as we possibly
I know
can.
You're the right person for it.
Dr. Simopoulos, again, thank you. I hope that I get to meet you in real life, in person, beyond a Zoom, but it was just an honor.
We have to meet with Charlie, the three of us, maybe sometime in Boston.
I would absolutely be honored. I would love it. And just thank you so much for coming and sharing your amazing wisdom with us. And just very, very.
You're very welcome. I really enjoyed it. And your enthusiasm.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
To be continued. As always, thank you for listening to New Frontiers in Functional Medicine, where our sponsors help bring the very best minds in functional medicine. And of course, today is no exception. Not everybody can be a sponsor on my platform. I appreciate the good work, the relentless research, and the generous support from my friends at Rupa Health, Biotics, Integrative Therapeutics, Timeline, and OneSkin. These are brands I know and trust and use in my clinic and can confidently recommend to you. Please visit them online and let them know you learned about them on New Frontiers. And if it's not too much to ask, consider leaving a thumbs up and a kind review wherever you're listening to New Frontiers. Thanks.